I was on my way home from the attorney's office when I almost pulled over to cry. Not from sadness, from relief, from the kind of joy that builds up at your eyes and makes it hard to see the road. My brother Clement had passed 4 months earlier. Heart attack, 61 years old, no warning, and the estate had taken all this time to settle. But that morning, the paperwork was finally done. The lake house in Wisconsin, the rental property on the east side of Columbus, the savings account I didn't even know he had. All of it had come to me. The total was somewhere north of $2 million. I kept thinking about how Clement would have laughed at me for getting emotional in a parking garage. He was always the stoic one. I hadn't told my daughter yet. I wanted to do it in person, sit her down at the kitchen table the way our father used to when he had something important to say, and tell her that her uncle, who she'd always called the quiet one, had left us something that could change everything. She'd been struggling. I knew that much. Her husband had been between jobs for going on 8 months, and the last time we spoke on the phone, she sounded tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. I drove to their house without calling first. I wanted to surprise her. That was my first mistake. Their house is the kind of place that looks fine from the street. 2-car garage, good neighborhood. A climbing rose my daughter planted herself along the front fence. I parked behind a truck I didn't recognize and walked up the driveway, and that's when I heard it. The kitchen window was cracked open. They were talking inside. Or rather, he was talking. My son-in-law has a voice that carries whether he means it to or not. I stopped walking. The man is 63 years old with a bad knee and he lives alone, he was saying. What does he need a house for? What does he need any of it for? My daughter said something I couldn't make out. Her voice was lower. I'm not saying anything bad about him, he said. I'm just saying, practically speaking, if he sold that place and helped us out, actually helped us instead of just showing up with grocery bags like we're charity cases, we wouldn't be in this situation. I stood there on the driveway in the October cold, and I didn't move. He's not going to sell it, my daughter said. I could hear her more clearly now. He would if you asked him right. You never ask him right. You apologize before you even get the question out, because I feel guilty asking. You shouldn't. He's your father. That's what fathers do. That's what the money is for. I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough that my knee started aching, the bad one he mentioned. Long enough to feel something go cold in my chest that I didn't know how to name. I turned around and walked back to my car. I sat in the driver's seat for a while with the heat running. I looked at the climbing rose. My daughter had planted that in the second spring after they moved in. She'd been so proud of it. She'd sent me a photo when it first bloomed. I drove home. My wife passed 11 years ago. Breast cancer, caught too late, gone too fast. The story so many men my age know too well. After that, it was just me and my daughter. She was 24 when her mother died, already engaged to the man who is now standing in her kitchen, calculating my property value. I had poured everything I had into making sure she was okay. Every holiday, every birthday, every time she called me because the pipes froze or the car made a noise, or she just needed to hear a familiar voice. I had believed until that afternoon that what we had was real. Not perfect, but real. That night I sat at my kitchen table and tried to think clearly. I'm an engineer by training. Retired, but the habit it never leaves you. You don't panic, you assess. You figure out what you actually know versus what you assumed. What I knew, my son-in-law wanted access to money he thought I had. He didn't know about the inheritance yet. He was calculating based on what he imagined my assets to be. My house, my pension, my savings. If he was willing to say what he said based on that, what would he do if he found out about $2 million? What I didn't know, how much of this was him and how much was her? That was the question that kept me up until 2 in the morning. I had known for a while that my son-in-law was not who I thought he was when they first got together. He had a way of making you feel like you were in his confidence, that particular charm some men have, the kind that makes you feel chosen when he sits down next to you at a family gathering. When they first married, I thought he was ambitious, driven. The kind of man who would take care of my daughter. What I came to understand slowly, over years, was that he confused wanting things with working for them. He'd had 3 jobs in the time they'd been married. Each departure was always someone else's fault. The manager who didn't respect him, the company that wasn't going anywhere, the opportunity that came along that he didn't want to miss. He always had an explanation, and the explanation always sounded reasonable until you laid them all end to end. My daughter never said a bad word about him to me. I used to think that was loyalty. Now I wondered if it was something else. I called my attorney the next morning. His name is Phil Grayson. We went to college together, and he is the most unshockable man I have ever met. I told him what I'd heard. There was a pause on the line. "Before you do anything," he said, "I want you to know your options." That was when things started to become clearer. I didn't contact my daughter for 2 weeks. That was hard. She called twice, and I answered both times, kept things light, said I'd been busy with the estate paperwork, which was true enough. I listened to her voice carefully for any sign that she knew what her husband had said. There was nothing I could point to. She sounded like herself. She asked if my knee was bothering me. In those 2 weeks, I did several things. I had Phil restructure how the inherited assets were held. The lake house went into a trust. The rental property stayed in my name, but with specific provisions about what happened to it in the event of my death. None of it, in any scenario, would pass directly to my son-in-law. If my daughter inherited, she would inherit. Not them, not a joint account he could access. Her name, her control. I also hired someone to do a background check. I know how that sounds. I'm not a suspicious man by nature. But something Phil said stuck with me. You heard one conversation. Find out if it's a pattern or a moment of weakness. I wanted to know which one I was dealing with. It was not a moment of weakness. The background check turned up 3 things I hadn't known. The first was a civil judgment from 5 years ago. A former business partner who'd sued him for $22,000 over a failed venture my son-in-law had apparently walked away from, without settling his share of the debts. The second was a credit report that showed the kind of debt accumulation that doesn't come from bad luck. And the third, the one that sat in my stomach like a stone, was a conversation the investigator had with a neighbor of theirs, an older woman who'd mentioned casually that she'd seen my son-in-law's car parked outside a house across town several times over the past year, always on weekday afternoons, always when my daughter would have been at work. I put the folder in my desk drawer and sat with it for 3 days. I am not a man who acts out of anger. I learned that from my father, who used to say that the decisions you make furious are the ones you spend the longest time undoing. But I want to be honest. I was angry. I was angry in the particular way that comes when you realize you have been naive about something important, something you should have seen, and the person who paid for your blindness was someone you love. My daughter deserved better than what she had, and she did not yet know it. I called her on a Sunday afternoon and asked if I could take her to lunch. Just her. I said I wanted to talk about the estate, that there were some things she should know. She said, "Of course, Dad," and we picked a place she liked, a quiet Italian restaurant about halfway between our houses. I got there early and sat facing the door. When she walked in, I saw it immediately. The thing I'd been telling myself I was imagining for the past year. The tension she carried in her shoulders. The way she smiled when she saw me, genuine but with something behind it. She looked like someone who was managing something difficult and had gotten very good at not letting it show. We ordered. We talked about her uncle Clement for a while, about memories I hadn't thought about in years. She cried a little when I mentioned a fishing trip the 3 of us had taken when she was 12. I was glad I'd chosen somewhere quiet. Then I told her about the inheritance. I watched her face. There was real surprise there, and real happiness, and for a moment she looked like herself at 20, before any of this. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Dad," she said, "that's incredible. I'm so happy for you." And then, and I will not forget this, she paused, and she looked down at the table and she said, "He's going to want to know about this." She didn't say "I want to know," she said he. I kept my voice even. "I know," I said. "That's actually what I want to talk to you about." I didn't show her the folder. I wasn't ready to do that yet, but I told her what I had heard in the driveway. I told her word for word, as best I could remember, what her husband had said about me. She went very still. "He didn't mean it like that," she said, but her voice was quiet, automatic. "Sweetheart," I said, "I'm not here to prosecute him. I'm here to talk to you, just you, not about what he meant, about what you need." She looked up at me, and something in her face shifted in a way I can't fully describe. Like a door opening just a crack. "Things have been hard," she said. "I know they have. He keeps saying it's going to turn around. I know." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I don't know what I'm doing, Dad. I had waited a long time to hear her say that. Not because I wanted her to be lost, but because I knew that until she admitted it, at least to herself, at least to me, there was nothing I could do to help her. We talked for 2 hours. I didn't tell her everything I knew, not yet. I told her enough for her to understand that I saw what was happening, that I wasn't fooled, and that I was not going to stand by while someone treated her like a resource to be managed. I also told her that no matter what happened, she would be taken care of. That was the promise I made her mother 11 years ago in a hospital room, and I intended to keep it. When we walked out of the restaurant, she held onto my arm for a moment before she went to her car. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. My son-in-law called me that evening. I wasn't surprised. I had expected it sooner, actually. His tone was different than it usually was. Still friendly on the surface, but with an edge underneath, like a man who had been briefed on something and was trying to decide how to play it. I hear congratulations are in order, he said. Thank you, I said. That's a significant amount to have come in. Have you thought about what you're going to do with it? I told him I had. That I'd been working with my attorney on some restructuring. That the assets were going into trust arrangements designed to protect them long term. There was a pause. Trust arrangements, he said. Phil's been very helpful. He says it's the smart move for someone in my position. Estate planning, tax efficiency, you know how it goes. Another pause. Longer. That makes sense, he said, but I could hear it, the recalibration happening in real time. I appreciate you calling, I said. It means a lot. He said something polite, and we hung up. I sat in my armchair and looked at the dark window for a while. My knee ached. Outside, the neighbor's dog was barking at something in the yard. I thought about Clement, how he'd died without warning, without a chance to say whatever he might have wanted to say. I thought about how quickly things could change and how slowly you sometimes understood what was right in front of you. 6 weeks later, my daughter called me on a Tuesday morning. Her voice was different, steadier. She told me she had talked to someone, a therapist she'd started seeing, after our lunch, without telling her husband. She told me she had also called Phil Grayson's office on her own, without telling me, and asked some general questions about her options. Phil had called me afterward and said she had good instincts. She told me she wasn't ready to say anything definite yet, that she needed more time. I told her she had all the time she needed. Then she said, I found the car records, Dad. I was quiet. I wasn't looking for anything, she said. I was going through the credit card statements because I was trying to understand where the money was going, and there were gas charges, patterns I couldn't explain. Okay, I said. I'm not falling apart, she said, and I could tell she was saying it as much to herself as to me. I just wanted you to know that I know, and that I'm thinking. I'm proud of you, I said. She made a small sound that I think was her trying not to cry. I used to think, she said, that if I just kept things steady long enough, they'd get better on their own, that I just had to hold on. I know, I said. I don't think that anymore. We talked for a while about practical things, about what the trust structure meant for her, about how Phil had built certain provisions into the documents specifically with her in mind, about the lake house, which I told her I'd like to take her to next summer, the two of us, the way her Uncle Clement used to take us when she was small. She said she would like that very much. I didn't rescue my daughter that day in the attorney's office when I first got the news. I didn't swoop in with a check and solve everything the way I might have wanted to, back when I thought money was what she needed. What she needed was to find her own ground again, to be seen clearly by someone who loved her, and to start seeing herself clearly too. What I gave her wasn't a windfall. It was a foundation, something solid underneath, so that when she was ready to move, she would have somewhere to stand. Clement would have approved of that, I think. He was always better than me at the long game. The lake house has good fishing. I'm told the walleye are particularly good in June. I have already told her to mark her calendar, and this time, she said yes without hesitating.